Hello there. Welcome to today's live stream. I am super excited to get into it today. We've got a cool special guest with us, Bill King. He's the director of marketing at a company called Phrase. We're going to be talking all about artificial intelligence, user experience, SEO, and kind of what the future of SEO is going to look like, and how we kind of meld these technology and human components together and really think about the user. So we're really going to get into some of the specifics here, and hopefully Bill's going to tell us all about the future of SEO and what everything we need to know as we prepare. I got to get in my couple quick promotions here before we kick things off. First of all, if you're already subscribed to our YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button and hang out with us for the future sessions. We've got workshops, live Q&As like this, all kinds of stuff coming up. Over the next few months. I just finished booking a whole bunch of new content, so we'll be scheduling those in the very near future. And also, if you are not already a member of our community, we have a free Slack community. It's focused on content marketing, SEO, kind of all things growth. Again, we have all kinds of content like this. We also share exclusive content, tips, strategies, tactics, case studies, etc. in that community, as well as hosting live Q&As and Slack AMAs with various folks. We got a whole bunch of really cool marketers in there, agency, in-house, freelance consultants, the whole gamut. So check that out. Again, it's a free Slack community. You can join it by going to yesoptimist.com/tofu, TOFU. One click join in Slack, and we'd love to have you join us there. With that all said and out of the way, I'm going to bring in Bill here in just a moment, and we will get things kicked off. All right. Bill, hey, how you doing today?
Hey, Tyler. I'm doing great. How you doing?
Good, man. Good. I'm doing really well. Thanks. First of all, thanks again for taking time out of your busy day. I know you juggle a lot. We were just talking before. Being director of marketing at a startup is fun. You get to wear a lot of hats. You're always kind of putting out fires and stuff like that. How I know you recently started at Phrase. Like how have things been going so far? How long have you been there?
Yeah, I've been there for about 3.5 months. Just joined the team. Came over from Drift and was running SEO and acquisition for them for about 1.5 years. They're doing quite well, so I'm very happy for everybody over there. And yeah, so I basically lead marketing, which means that my primary sort of objective is to drive signups for the platform. But as we were discussing before we got on the air, a lot of those, there's a lot of responsibilities outside of just the sign up number, because I'm actually kind of like the user of the product. So I was a customer before joining. So obviously being the person who does SEO, person who's thinking about on-site page signals, there's other conversations we have where I'm thinking about, if I were the person either buying or using this, how would I think about it? And so that helps us actually grow faster because we have that internal kind of dialogue.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was as we were discussing before, that was kind of my experience as well as coming in. I wasn't quite the user when I was running marketing for a startup, but I again had the very similar role of being kind of a little bit of everything as well as leading marketing. So you mentioned briefly kind of your path. I know you've been doing content marketing and SEO, I think about as long as I have, around a decade or so. And you worked at some really well-known companies, HubSpot, AvidXchange, Drift. I'd love to just start off by asking, what do you feel like has changed in the world of content marketing and SEO in your time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's pretty clear, and that's kind of the mission of Phrase, is that we're moving very quickly towards a friction-free, answer-driven experience online. And that's basically the hypothesis that Phrase is built on. And if you think about SEO today, it's actually a fight for pixels more than it is a fight for relevancy, because it's all about where you are positionally on a SERP, and that determines how many clicks you get, right? The basic hypothesis behind Phrase and where I think that SEO is going, and the reason why I wanted to join the team, to be honest with you, is we see a future where it's no longer a fight about position, it's a fight about relevancy to users. And it's a fight about who answers questions the best and who is optimized for those experiences. Because if you look at a lot of websites, I mean, we've put in so much work to get our content up to a certain par and to do a lot of outreach and to fight for those positions 1 through 3 for the most clicks. There could be a day coming, and this is what we really think about, is like, what if that went away? What if the primary way for you to engage with either a brand or Google or anybody was all about voice, and it was all about, friction-free environments? So we already see that happening. I mean, Rand study about how there's less than 50% of searches result in a click to a search result. We know why. We know that that's because of the changes in the way that Google's trying to keep you on site, et cetera. But they still need information from brands. And so what we're trying to do is get ahead of that and say, okay, we believe the future of getting information is about answering questions and optimizing for those experiences. So that's the long answer to your question.
Yeah, I think like that's like the biggest shift that I know I see in my journey or my experience with content. And you kind of touched on this, but I think like Google, rank brain and these interstitial penalties and all this stuff that Google has rolled out over the last 10 years or longer, has really, as you said, it's really been focused on user experience over, the kind of what we think of as traditional SEO elements, right?
That's right. Yeah. And I think like you have to act with an owner's mindset nowadays to really do like SEO and on page really well, because there are some bets you need to make.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? What do you mean by an owner's mindset?
Yeah, like there are short-term things you can do to fill up the stat sheet. Like you can do a bunch of, link building, you can do a bunch of other stuff, because we're all like, everybody's short-term thinking in business. And this is something I think about all the time. Like I started my career playing poker online, and I think about that all the time about business. It's like there's short-term objectives that we know that work today, and we're pressing those edges as hard as possible. We're doing a lot of outreach, we're doing a lot of content, we're distributing it across different formats to try to get as much traffic as possible. But super important to place bets for where you think things are going in the future too. You know what I mean? Like we've seen a quick evolution of the SERP and how people prefer to get information. It's so important for you to step out of that day to day and say, okay, where is Google going? Where are consumer like expectations and preferences going? And then how do I place a few bets for me to be there when I think those things would happen? But again, most of our focus is today. Like we have our goals, you know what I mean? So like, that's one thing I used to think a lot about, like in my day-to-day SEO work, was like, what if things change? Happens all the time. Right. Things can happen overnight, and all of a sudden your business could turn the lights out. We've seen some crazy stuff happen over the years. So
for sure. Yeah. A couple things that come to mind there is like, one is a few months back I had Ross Simmons on here.
He's a good guy.
With Ross. Yeah. We kind of talked about that in sort of even the broader context of like marketing in general. It's really like taking this kind of portfolio like investment approach of like, you've got your long-term bets, you've got your mid-term bets, you got your short-term bets, but like the challenge is like the allocation, right? Is like figuring out like, where are we putting most of our resources basically.
That's right.
That's like the modern challenge of SEO and of all marketing really is, as you're saying, like you can do stuff today to like hit discover, Google Discover is like a whole new thing that people are just learning about, right? And you can drive traffic today, but then in order to do that, are you then also sacrificing like long-term evergreen SEO value or like whatever? So you really have to think about those resources in a much more strategic way. And there's a lot more complexity.
100%. Yeah. Like, the kiss of death and the beautiful thing about business is that we have deadlines, because we always have to be making progress on things. But like, if you were really solving the problem, I think a lot of people would be thinking a lot more long-term. And that's what I mean about owner's mindset. Like the beautiful part about playing poker for a living is that when you're not feeling well or you're not playing well, you just stop, because you're not paid by the hour. And obviously like day-to-day marketers, we have objectives. We have to continually grow in today's world, but it's so important to just place bets for where you think things are going, because I think it's pretty clear at this point where things are going. So.
Yeah, actually, and I think that's like a perfect segue. So I'm super intrigued. So I know Phrase's tagline and kind of the positioning is that it's SEO that will still work in 2030. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Yeah. So like right now, like I was saying before, like our general hypothesis is that if we create really good content and we get enough people to verify that that thing is the best result for the answer, then mostly Google's going to accept that those agreed upon terms, right? But the reality is that machine learning and AI is way better at understanding what's true correlation to value than links and content can possibly be on their own, right? So over the years, like you've seen products go to platform, especially with Google, where like they own Google Analytics, they own Chrome, they own the search engine, they own Android, and all of a sudden, wow, huge data set now on individual people and how their behaviors are over the long tail, not just when they're on search, not just when they're on your site, but when their entire user behavior becomes one big set of data. It's kind of fascinating if you think about like the amount of stuff that they can analyze. But I think a lot about that, and I'm like, what is Google's goals? Let's take our marketer hat off for a second, because Google's a ads company. Their job is to sell ads. And if you pay attention to what their sort of like approach has been over the past few years, they've been putting in people whose sole purpose is to increase growth. They just started their own growth team not that long ago, and to increase ad clicks. And so I think a lot about websites tomorrow will actually be more like databases of information that Google can call upon and deliver to their users to increase their platform monetization. And so if that hypothesis comes true, then what's the need for clicks? That's just a real estate game. It's not about a relevancy game. And so I was on a SEMrush webinar like a year ago when we were talking about featured snippets and the future of SEO. And I'm like, guys, think about SEO as like a CRM for your users. You want to drive as much engagement as possible with that specific person. And that could be in search. It could be on YouTube. It could be on Spotify, like all these other like platforms. You want to really nail what that recipe is for your users and really nail like what's important to them. Because I think as the web gets more and more like there's so much content out there and niches are getting very specific. We're seeing products that are built for very sort of specific applications. That's going to continue to be the case. So the future of search and content is about relevancy. It's not about fighting for position, if that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And a couple thoughts that come to mind there. One is, I think, what maybe people don't always understand or don't always comprehend, and you sort of alluded to this, is that like Google's algorithm is not like just what they can see. There's also like these signals that users are generating that are powering the algorithm, right? And this is not like super new, but again, I feel like people don't really understand this. And so like, even if you publish great content and you rank number 1, but everyone comes to your site and then immediately goes back to the search results, like Google is going to see that and they will know that signals that your content is actually not as relevant or it's not matching the user's intent. And so I think like that thinking or just understanding that at like a fundamental level is that like Google is really serving the user and basing their rankings on those algorithms. And then the other thing that's super interesting that you just mentioned is that like as you said, Google is also, they have all of this data on users, and one of the big things that again I just referenced previously, but Google Discover is going to change everything, right? Google Discover
huge on Discover. Yeah, I'm huge on Discover.
It's showing people content without a query, like just based on their past behaviors, as you were just saying, right? And across all their platforms. So if I go and do a bunch of searches about content marketing, I might open up Discover and find some content that I would have never found or never searched for.
100%. Yeah, like that's the big like shift that they're making, and I've been a huge like, I've been saying a lot about Discover, because if you think about the different sort of sides of your brain, one is like you have specific intent to find information on a specific thing. That's where search is perfect, right? So like search engines, site search, which is something that Phrase also does, is give you the ability to get site search and get your proprietary data, so you can use that in your funnel. But that's for specific, I have a problem, I need a solution. But the more like casual browsing with like low intent, just like entertain and engage me, that's something Google really has stunk at, to be honest with you. Like they tried with what was it called, Google Plus, like years ago, to like make their own social graph and all this other stuff, but the product stunk, and I'm too old, right? So like I actually use Google Plus, which is embarrassing, but but like they haven't really had a great like offering for people who just want to be entertained and sort of like, they want to hear about things they're interested in. So I think like discover and like friction-free search experiences that are like on their product is really the future. And so if you were to place bets, you would say to yourself, how do I solve Google's problem, not my problem? My problem is clicks and impressions and leads and conversions. But Google's problem is completely different. It's not aligned to your goals. Google's problem is keeping people on site, really high quality content that keeps them coming back. And if you really think deeply about that, you really want to say to yourself, what are the types of things I need to start acting on today that might be 10 or 20% of my day to day, but they'll compound later on. Because always like there's a first mover advantage on everything. And marketers are like, we're so like, it's so easy for us to focus on like what's next versus like what works today because it's fun and exciting. But I think this like shift we're talking about, this is real. This isn't like, let's go learn Python to like automate like scraping. Like this is like a true shift in how platforms will be used in the future. And it's really important to get ahead of these things.
Can you talk a little bit about that in terms of kind of like I guess on the kind of actionable level or like a tactical level? Like what are those things that are 10 or 20% now that you think are going to be much more important in the coming weeks, months?
Yeah. It's not a very exciting thing, but it's like, you really have to create that relevance across all different stages of the user. So a good example is if you've optimized your business or in your SEO or your content marketing 100% around like transactional searches, you're going to be relevant to that user in 1% of the time, maybe less. But when you and I are creating this podcast and we're creating content, we're talking about content marketing, that appeals to a very wide audience with a lot of different intents, right? So like you've got it's sort of like the funnel thing we talked about before, but it's more about intent. When people want to just be entertained and want to like just learn or like want to like hear us talk about SEO, you need to have that play going, because if you don't, you're going to pay through the nose for those users later on whenever everybody else has the attention. So it's super important to start placing bets on that, but also like balance that with like creating really good structured content that can be distributed across different mediums that actually does help you sort of bridge the gap between top of the funnel and bottom of the funnel. Good example is like Discover is a great place right now to get in front of people, but their ads are like phenomenal right now. There's crazy ROI on that. So you can drive a lot of transactional clicks from that. And like the other thing too is like I can't believe I'm saying this, but I used to be sort of like the anti like brand because I was such a like right side brain kind of person. But like like you have to create reasons for people to actually understand, like to actually know what your brand is about outside of when they go to buy. And I used to be so like polar to one side or the other because that's where the money was, and it was like all you could do is focus on that. But as machine learning and AI are getting better at understanding people and what they want, like you can't brute force things anymore. So you have to create like an overall portfolio of ways to engage with users. And that's hard. And like ultimately what happens is it puts the small guys in a really tough spot because they don't have a lot of resources. But I think the most important thing is like start acting today on like what you think your users want and double down on bets that you think will map to these changes that are coming.
Yeah. So if I were just to sort of repeat back what I'm hearing, at least, and you can correct me if I misinterpret this, but is like I read that as like, hey, we should be thinking about a full funnel content strategy, right? Even when we've got pressure to say, hey, this content has to drive conversions, et cetera, we should still be thinking about how the long-term game is going to be focused on content all the way up the funnel and even, kind of pre-funnel content in a discovery context, if you will. And then the other thing that I'm thinking too is like how search integrates with all these other channels and how we're creating content for other channels that is driving these interactions that maybe we can't right now measure as like a direct impact on SEO per se, but what we expect that in the future, Google is going to be able to kind of link all that stuff together and be able to kind of connect all those dots.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I think the brands that are doing a really, really good job at nailing this today, they have their entertainment content, they have their true like decision making content really, really nailed. And they have it in multiple media formats so you can consume it in the way that you prefer. And they're not forcing you to engage with something in a specific way. And they're making things friction free, because I think that's the end of the day, like, distribution is probably the biggest problem right now, and especially in the future for marketers. Like, that's always been a problem. But in the future, when it's less about brute force and it's about relevancy, you actually won't even get a crack at a lot of bats, because maybe you haven't shown that you're relevant to a specific group of people. So if you don't have website content on like content marketing, and then you're selling content marketing services, like that's going to be a tough future for you, because you haven't really shown that you're relevant to the people who are interested in that. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's I think it's so funny, because I almost think of it as like a system of levers and pulleys, right? And like sometimes the things that's not obvious could have a huge impact, right? Like some top of the funnel piece could increase your brand awareness, that then leads to a higher click through rate at the bottom of the funnel, and then that improves your SEO and drives more conversion, right? And so you have to really think about it in that very holistic, like strategic way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like, I've thought a lot about like how to do that, because that's very theory based. It's like very esoteric, is like, hey, do all this stuff, but like it needs to be in formats that are structured very, very well on your site, that can be used in multiple sources. So I that goes back to like what I said before, which is like, here's the hypothesis. It's that you have to do these things at each stage of the funnel, but how you do it is really great structured data on your site. It's technically sound, that can be easily shared in either Discover or search or YouTube feeds. Like, all this stuff is like, that's the technical foundation. You layer the creativity on top of that, and you touch each of these areas, and I think you'll be set up well for the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I want to maybe let's jump into that a little bit further, because I think like the next question, if I'm a marketer and I'm hearing this, like, hey, just take a step back and do a bunch of top of the funnel stuff, because it's going to pay off in the long term when Google starts changing stuff or whatever. How do you think about that? In terms of like getting buy-in internally on something like that? How do you sort of prove that or show that that's valuable if you're an in-house marketer, say, and you got to tell your boss that that's what's coming down the pike?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that you need to start looking at all the different ways that your content can be engaged in. So a good example is like, let's go down the path of Discover. There are specific things you need to do to optimize your content to be considered for Discover, right? So like I think the best way to think about it is like addressable market for your content. So if you create an amazing piece on, let's say, content marketing, but it's only optimized for Google search engine, then you're really limiting your entire exposure across all these different platforms. So start thinking about addressable market for my content, because like, and that's why the technical stuff is so important, because if you can get that right, then you can set up your content to be distributed across multiple mediums. If you're only relying on just search, man, that is such a tough game today. Right. And I think you need to start thinking holistically. Like, you want to understand the ways your content can be distributed, the different channels you can be at. And you want to say, okay, are we getting traffic from there? Yes or no? What's the total addressable market for that specific channel or avenue? And what do I think that the impact could be if we invested in this over the long term? So that goes back to like just being a good business person. Like, if I invest engineering hours into building structured data, into optimizing my site for these things, what do I think that'll increase my overall like impressions and clicks and whatnot? That's like that's the foundational level, but then you need to kind of like, you need to put on your like thinking hat a little bit too, which is like, this is what I can prove today, but what are some other bets that I think that align to that as well? So like, you might not have great data on like what the upside is for Discover. So you can just create some hypotheses like, hey, if we invest in this, I think it'll improve our ability to get in front of our target audience by X%. You might be 3,000% off. Doesn't matter. You get better as you build these muscles over time of calling your shots. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah. I think that's I know we keep coming back to Google Discover. I feel like we could have had a whole chat just on Google Discover, but
sure.
I think that's a great place to start with like kind of showing this internally, right? And so two things based on what you're sharing here. One is like that whole kind of placing your bets mentality, right? So hey, hey boss, can we dedicate one of our 10 posts this month to like going after this Google Discover or like trying this new thing that I think is coming down the pike, right? So
for sure.
So make it kind of a contained experiment, and then my experience with Google Discover is when Google Discover hits, like the ROI is going to be very obvious pretty quick. Like I've seen thousands or tens of thousands of clicks coming to the site for content that was ranking for a low volume keyword previously, and all of a sudden it's just like a flood of traffic coming to that content. And so if you can show a quick win there, I think that's what really opens it up then to say like, all right, now we need to like figure out how to integrate that into the strategy on a more consistent basis.
Perfect. So we had to give you an example. So one of the first few hits we had at Drift for Discover was an article that we did a case study about Zoom, the founder, their growth strategy, et cetera. And so boom, pandemic happens, Zoom is in the news, all this stuff is happening, and Discover started surfacing that article up to people. I wasn't expecting it whatsoever, but it showed me like, oh, okay, so here's the potential that we have in this. Now I can use this as a proxy for other experiments that I think about with Discover. Or you can use benchmarks and just go totally from the ground up. But in order for you to like think about that, you really have to think about like the holistic like distribution strategy. It's like there are specific technical aspects of getting distribution on different platforms. There's tactical stuff you need to do like to drive relevance. But I would start thinking like, how do I maximize the total opportunity that I have for this content? Because we put so much effort, like especially, we were talking before we started the podcast. I'm a huge fan of your content and have been for a long, long time. If you put that much energy into your content, like think strategically about how you can get the maximum on it and what are the bets you need to place for you to do that.
Yeah, totally. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes back to kind of being a channel almost, right? It's really about creating content and then either repurposing or chopping that content or in some cases creating new content to kind of fit the various channels through which you're going to get in front of the right people, which is of course a whole nother challenge in and of itself, but nevertheless that's right. Part of the game, right? That's
for sure.
The world we live in.
Yep.
Cool. That's super awesome. I think I think that's really helpful for folks. I'd love to maybe take a step back and think through maybe some of the SEO that I think people think about right now, which is creating content. So people search, you come up in the search results. How do you think about that with respect to like UX, right? So I think a lot about user experience as a function of SEO. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, like your thoughts on how those two are related?
Yeah, for sure. The easiest way I would compare it is like you're at a war with Google for how to keep users on your site just like they are, right? So if you're going into SEO and content marketing like an owner's mentality, you're thinking to yourself, every click counts. Every single time I get rewarded with a click from Google, I need to do my best job possible to retain that user, expand the amount of times that they would want to come back to our site and continually engage with us. Because I think it's clear in the data that I've analyzed, but the days of like just jamming as much traffic into a landing page that never converts, I think are over. And you mentioned before, like pogo sticking, how that impacts everything. I would think really deeply about like, how do I create an offering for my brand that appeals to this person at every aspect of their journey? So like a great way to do that is to create really, really good content that attracts somebody there. But once they get on the site, what are the types of things they might be interested in as a next step? And how do you cater to that intent, right? So a good example is, I'll give you an example from previously from Drift. So we would test all the time, like offerings to learn more content from our insider offering. We would test like sign up for a demo, like all the traditional things. But ultimately our goal was just, we need to create a conversion so that we can then surround them with content and keep them coming back over and over and over again. That drives that relevance and that sort of like brand affinity. But what we're doing at Phrase specifically is we're basically building this sort of AI on the background. So if you drive, we have two different tools. We have content that drives people to the site, but we also have these UX tools where once somebody gets on the site and they have natural next questions that might be related to that topic, how do you understand what those are? And number two, deliver them so that people can continue their path. Those are just a good example of like how you would think about SEO, or like how you would think about content as like a product owner. Your brand is your product, and you want to create like an offering that like touches every aspect of their intent. So that's the best way I would describe it. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been sort of preaching the gospel lately. I feel like about the role of UX and how that relates to search intent, and really understanding through past the query, and as you said, I think there's no shortcuts these days, right? Like it used to be like, oh, we want to rank for this query, like we'll just stand up a page and it doesn't really matter if it's if it's an informational page going after a transactional, like whatever, we'll try to like brute force it into the SERP. And I think, like as you said, that those days are over. Like you have to first and foremost understand the type of query that it is, where people are, what type of content it needs to be at the very highest level, and then of course think through the click to the user experience.
Yep.
I'd love to know, are there specific metrics that you look at or you think about in terms of sort of quantifying or measuring that user experience or that alignment with search intent?
Yeah, like we'll look at there's the obvious stuff, which is like, do they end up purchasing from the brand? I think I look at things like, how many times does that person return back to the site? What's their on-session engagement? Do they visit multiple pages? Are they checking out different types of content? Are we getting them to stay long on page, or are they just sitting on the page, getting their answer, and then going back to search? That, to me, those are like inferred signals that we haven't quite solved the real home run. The real home run is this person gets their answer from search, they get on site, and they realize, oh my goodness, where has this been all my life? And that's like a really hard thing to deliver. But if you think about search, there's so many different intents that somebody could have. If you write like a how to do a certain thing, there are sites where you just get your answer and you go, and there's no reason for you to continue. But I think the sites who really, really like nail intent and do a really good job are thinking to themselves, what are all the types of things that this person could potentially looking for after they get that answer, and thinking about that journey. Like, does somebody sign up and then do they check out multiple pages? Do they share things? Like, do they sign up for a newsletter? Do they download stuff? Like, those are the qualitative signals that I would see when I'm like really hitting a home run on this person got their answer and then they want to continue. Part of that could also be like, maybe you're just creating the wrong content. I've done many experiments where like I've completely failed on hypotheses where I was like, sure that if I get this article to rank, that those people will sign up. A good example is like, one thing I failed at was we built this really interesting, what's it called? Audio and video app where you could like test out your audio quality and your webcam quality. And the hypothesis was that if I got people to search that, they would then sign up for our video product and become a user. And the signals were pretty clear that while it was great for SEO and for links and for traffic, it didn't translate into a really valuable user. And so I'm always thinking with that hat on of like, what's the actual goal we're trying to do? Is this the right person for our brand? Is this the right person who will come back, tell their friends, like share things? That's what I'm looking for.
Right. Yeah, that's even a step further than most people get, which is really thinking through the acquisition all the way through the acquisition and into people becoming customers and then retention and all the other kind of follow-on metrics that,
for sure,
if you have the right data, you can track all the way back to, as you said, the keywords that people are using and the landing page that they're originating their journey on, et cetera, et cetera. I definitely want to jump into that real quick before we kind of shift into that acquisition thing. I want to just talk through this question here we got in the chat. Karen wants to know what bets are you making at Phrase right now about the future of SEO and how is that shaping your marketing strategy as the director of marketing?
Right. That's a really good question because you got to show the receipts, right? You can always talk about things, but you got to show what you're doing. Good question.
Right.
So two specific things. Number one is we're using the product to drive acquisition. So one of the first things I worked on when I first started here, something I always wanted to do at previous places, but never had like the capital or like the pull to make them happen. And I'm like, all right, this is the type of stuff I believe is the future. So we have a template marketplace where you can go and go to phrase and you could say, I want to create a content brief, but I don't want to start from scratch. So we're creating these like publicly indexable assets where you can go check out the content brief. If you like it and it's what you want to use, you can click a button and import it right into the product and actually use it to create a content brief and send it to a writer. So we're trying to tie search demand to product usage. And that is the type of user that we really want. That's like a home run for our business. That's one thing. And then the other thing too is like, we're really investing in optimizing for voice search and for friction-free kind of searches in the future. So a good example is like, we'll create these sort of like knowledge bases of content on top of a topic. So if you wrote a post about content marketing, there might be 100 sort of like long tail questions that somebody would ask about that. So what we do is we either put them into FAQs or we like work them into the body of the content. And that allows us to optimize for what we think the future is, which might be that clicks go away. So how do we cater to that? But the reality is we have to optimize for today, what's working today. So we create really long form content just like everybody else does. And we try to hedge our bets with like, we want to create articles that are great, that are interesting for the topic, but we want to get distribution beyond that. So how do we think about like structured data, question answering, because that gets us featured snippets and stuff that might not like drive a lot of clicks, because if you look at Search Console, we might be like in the #1 spot, but we're not getting a lot of clicks. I'm fine with that because I'd rather have an impression on a very specific topic that Google says we're best answer to and forego the clicks for now, because I'm making a bet in the future on relevance. So we sort of balance those two things, if that makes sense. Those are like the three things we think holistically a lot about.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so when you think about that, go back to your first point there about you're kind of optimizing, focusing on sort of the queries that are best aligned with like actual potential future users.
That's right.
From a strategy perspective, does that mean that you then sort of sacrifice some queries that are less aligned, that are sort of traditional like awareness or kind of top of the funnel stuff that maybe are less aligned with actual user?
It's more of a prioritization thing for me. So if I like a good example is at previous places I've worked at, we've looked at like a larger KPI for us is like, does this person use the product? So a good example is I used to work at a company that we had like a very specific number of engagements on a specific product that was like our larger OKR for successful users. So if we drive a bunch of people who come to the site from SEO, they sign up, but they never actually get active. They never actually like put the thing on their site. They never like invite their friends. They never do all that stuff. To me, that's inferred that we have a mismatch between intent and what our product actually solves for. So there might be these like really juicy keywords. Like a good example is like we could create content on like link building, right? But that could be a use for us. But like I want to prioritize my go to market around things that drive adoption and drive like intense usage of the product. So once I fill that gap, then I move on to the secondary keywords. I think about it like an onion layer, if that makes sense. So there's topics that are directly correlated to product usage and successful usage. I want to nail those and land those and create the best possible experience. The next layer is solutions or problems related to the products that we have. And so I build content around that. And then we move to general application topics. And that's like brand, that's like, like podcasting and stuff like, and so like you want to have all of those going, but you want to place your bets at first, at least in our stage, we're 6 people. It's a small company. So like right now we need users of the product who are passionate about it and like are going to give us that feedback. But I think like you really want to be, this is something I've learned just from stubbing my toe at different places I've worked at. we often over assume we have a lot more time than we actually do to do these types of things. You know what I mean? Like you're laughing because I know you can relate to it, but like I'll create a content strategy at the beginning of the year and I'm like, man, we're going to do this, that, this, that. But like, I have my like, don't miss. These are the things that I think will have the biggest impact, and we can play later on with the other stuff that's more fun, you know?
And I think the maybe underlying thing of what you're saying too is that prioritization actually matters, and likely will matter more in the future. And I think if I rewind, you know, probably even a year ago, you know, people would ask me like, oh, do I prioritize the top of the funnel or like the bottom of the funnel, or like whatever? And I would say, you know, oh, it really matters. It depends on the scenario and whatnot. I think where we're moving now, as you said, is that you know, we really want to start with those topics, those queries that are most central, most closely related to the product, and most likely to lead to not just traffic but engaged users and future customers, because those signals that Google is then going to collect from that search traffic is actually going to help you rank for other keywords in the future.
For sure.
Thinking through that, you know, kind of multiple steps into the future, and not, you know, hey, we're going to churn out the top of the funnel piece that nobody's going to ever convert from, but we're going to get a bunch of traffic, you know, and impress our boss. Like that actually might hurt you in the medium to long term if you kind of prioritize stuff first.
Yep, good example is like so with Phrase's Answers product, we give you that first party data. So as you get more people to come back to your site and you get more and more interactions, you get more and more first party data. Now you're sitting on thousands of questions and topics that your users that you know use the product, have paid you, and are coming back, are giving you information with these experiences on your site. And that informs your content strategy. Like, how do I build that second layer of the onion? There's inferred topics, and then there's like, I know based on the data that I've collected from my users, this is stuff they're interested in. So how do I double down on those things that we're having success? Because I think like it's just too expensive to grow these days to just drive like signups that never actually use the product. Or like if you're listening to this right now and you're in like an enterprise like marketing role and you're like, sweet, Bill, that's cool, but I don't get any data like this for like a year, or like I don't have it at all. Don't get discouraged by that. I think the most important thing is like, if you can't watch people with data, talk to them. Like call people, do some interviews. You can get that data some ways, but I think it's really important to think inward first and then move your way out from there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another sort of underlying theme here, which is that like tools like Phrase are going to come along, and the good news is that, you know, hopefully for people that are using this, they now have a set of data that's informing their strategy, and they're able to implement that and get smarter and better about their content. And that also makes it more competitive for everyone else. It's going to be harder and harder to compete without having some kind of either customer data, or at least talking to your customers or doing something to inform your strategy. And
that's right. And the other thing too is like these third-party tools are like, they do like an okay job because their goal is to sort of inform these hypotheses. I would way rather have my real data from people that I know that are using the product and that like are being successful. Or like maybe like if you build a community around your brand and product, maybe that doesn't like directly influence your SEO or content marketing strategy, but the insights you get from those people could. So like that's the owner mentality that I keep like harping on, is like, how would I build this engine if I were running the business? And yeah, that's you know, I don't want to go too, because it's really hard. We all have goals every day, but again, I think like these are really important bets that we need to start placing, is like, how do I get really good data? How do I like inform these hypotheses and just keep going through that motion?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're that's a great segue, because I want to talk about kind of your role, and so, you know, in the past, you know, you worked at Drift and Exchange, all these places, and you actually played like an acquisition role, so not kind of like a traditional content marketing role. Where my guess is that you were kind of on the hook more so than kind of your average marketer for actual revenue. Can you talk a little bit about that, kind of what your role was like there?
Yeah, that is exactly, you nailed it. So so basically, I'm responsible for the revenue that comes from these channels. So when I was at Drift, my role was acquisition, but I owned the dollars in, dollars out for SEO and paid. And that changes your thinking a bit, because if my job is just to jam as many users from search as possible, or from Google or from Facebook over to the company, like there's a million people that can do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what we were thinking about is like, how do we create these systems that drive actual revenue? That like, I need to make sure that my strategy aligns to how the business actually makes money. Otherwise, we're going to spend a ton of money. We're going to get a bunch of users in our product, and they're not going to convert over to people who actually pay us. So that changed a lot of my thinking about like, how do I place my bets? Like, where am I going to, like, how am I going to create this funnel in a way that actually I can prove tangible returns on this investment? So that made me think, like, how do I keep the risk low on these bets that I'm making, but maximize learnings as much as possible? Because when sales cycles are 90 days, you know, you start day one at a company, and the first bet you make might not translate until the next quarter. So you need to start thinking like, how do I think holistically about this funnel, and like, what are the things that I feel strongly are going to impact revenue, and what are the things that I'm not sure about that I want to test and validate. But there is I think there's a very big advantage to being in a role where you can sort of put the puzzle pieces together. Like if you're just doing SEO and you're just responsible for traffic, while that might be like a lot of sort of like a more focused type of thing, like when you're in acquisition and you're seeing things trickle through each stage of the funnel and stuff get killed, stuff convert, it's really fun to kind of like have those knobs you can turn and twist. And it also like, it aligns your team to what the company's outcomes are, which is ultimately making money.
Do you have any sort of specific, you know, maybe actionable or tactical advice for content marketers, like how they can better align content and SEO with revenue goals, specifically things that you've learned?
Yeah, I mean, like it's important to do the bottoms up, you know. I think because we get in our editorial calendars, we get in our like our traffic charts, and we're always like focused on driving more, that quality is so important. Because what you don't want to do is like put your head down, put a bunch of stuff out, and then the year all of a sudden, boom, is over, and you're like, man, this didn't work as well as I thought. So I think that like owner mentality is so important, and be proactive, like ask a lot of questions. If you don't have the right data or you don't have the right resources, at least you're thinking about these things, which I think is really, really important. Because as your career evolves and grows, it's going to be less about content. It's going to be less about links. It's going to be less about design and UX. It's going to be more about like input output. So that's a really important transition to make, because then you're acting like a business person who has the technical or tactical expertise. That's a dangerous combination.
Right. Yeah. That is definitely, I think, thinking about kind of the career path trajectory, if you will, is like, yeah, as you said, you get your metrics and how you are evaluated on your work get closer and closer to that bottom line, basically, is how my experience has gone, at least.
Well, let me be clear though, like something that a lot of people don't talk about, like if you're happy doing with what you're doing and that's what you want to do, life isn't all about climbing the ladder to the next spot. Like not every job is what you thought it was going to be. Like if you're happy creating and that's where you're like the most happy, maybe you like won't buy a more fancy car, but like think about solving for that, right? Like what makes me happy? What makes me tick like every single day? Do you care about data? Is that not your thing? Well, don't try to force yourself to be that person. I think it's good to challenge yourself, but like understand what makes you happy and motivates you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's great advice for anyone, but I think especially in marketing, because you know they always, there's like that sort of perennial joke, but it's totally true, right? If you're a great writer and you love writing, and all of a sudden you somehow get promoted to the content marketing manager, and now you don't get to do writing, you don't get to write anymore. That's not.
Yeah. So true. It's a very simple concept, but you know, we oftentimes like think linearly, like, hey, I want to like get to this next level because it's going to get me this. That statement is so dangerous, because like if you're happy with what you're doing today, I think that's the thing I focus on, is like, how do I do what I'm doing right now the best I possibly can, and learn as much as possible and get really good at it, and then let the chips fall where they may, you know?
Totally. Yeah. I think Going back to kind of the discussion about the acquisition and kind of tying content and SEO to revenue, I think one of the things that has changed for me personally over the years, and this is partially I think because I have kind of moved up that ladder, so to speak, but also I think because my thinking has just like I've been able to see kind of further into the business. And as you said, I think that's really that owner mentality, right? Is like thinking through past the top line of like traffic or clicks or whatever it is, and down to, okay, then there's conversions and there's revenue, and like there's all these layers that you need to be thinking through. And I think like even just at a tactical level, when you're creating a content marketing strategy, you're building out your plan or you're executing content or whatever it is, when you're like evaluating a keyword, like think it through to that level. Like don't just think like what's the volume of this keyword or how difficult is it going to be to rank, but like beyond that, like how close is this to an actual transaction? How tightly coupled is this to the actual product or the solution that we're providing?
Yep.
I think that in and of itself is just like a great mind shift to think through as we're kind of executing this on a day-to-day basis.
For sure. Yeah. Like I think that's really important because you take off the what am I thinking about? What are my goals hat? And you actually become on the side of the person you're talking to. Like I think some of the best bosses I've worked for, like, don't even care about where the links, what even links are. They don't even care, but they do care about like, what was your bet? How did you go about the process? What was the result? How do you think about that? Those are frameworks that like, no matter what changes in Google or content marketing, that will be useful for you no matter what you do in life.
Totally. Yeah. And I think the other thing too, for maybe the people on the other side of that equation, right? So maybe the content marketing manager or marketing director or whatever it is like a lot of times they shield people from even being able to understand that full line to the revenue, right? So they hire writers and they, hey, your job is to rank for this keyword, and that's all the information or context they get, so they, of course that content is not going to be great at driving revenue because you didn't tell them it was supposed to be good at driving revenue.
Right. Yeah, that's actually how I found out about Phrase. I was doing acquisition over at Drift, and I was like, hey, how come I'm sending this this list of keywords and topics and titles and this and that, and then they create something that's completely misaligned to what my vision was for that. And so I was like, okay, so clearly I have to bridge the gap here, but I've got 100 articles going out every month. I can only spend 30% or 40% of my time on SEO. I've got these other things to do. So like it was kind of a pivot where I was like, okay, we can build or buy it. So I just so happened to find that Phrase did everything I wanted to. It like automatically extracted all the information, boom, goes out to the writer. Now I can spend less time on the tactical stuff. I can spend more time on creating really great Loom videos for the writers to understand like who we are, what our brand is about, and like what we're, like build relationships with them and invest that time elsewhere. So like right now, there's a big shift in like the SEO and content world to like more technical things to automate these processes. So if you're in Twitter every day and you're seeing everybody who's like an absolute animal with code and you're getting very overwhelmed by that, like that it's tough to watch those things, but you need to realize that like there are kind of like you really want to like focus on how do I get rid of the things that were causing me pain and frustration, and then reinvest that into other aspects of your day-to-day. So like if there are tools and you can afford them, think like not just buying them because you want to make it easier, but like what else could I do with that? And like writer relationships are so important, man. I mean, like I went to school for journalism. I started my career like with a baseball blog and like built it up, and that was my like path to marketing. And so I value really good writers who care deeply and like want to understand the brand. They're not just like people you farm your stuff out to. It's like, what could you do with that time if you weren't spending on other things? It's pretty valuable, right? So
yeah, but and then to your point, like you also then have to use that time to invest in helping those people understand the strategy, right? Like and kind of top down. That's in my opinion, like that's the number one advantage of having a tool or automation or like however whatever it is like if it's saving you time and then you're able to use that time to better align all the way from the strategy to the planning to the actual implementation of the content and the SEO, because I think that's where so much stuff gets lost again, right? Is like you've got a great vision for how this aligns with the search intent and it's going to convert into revenue, But if that vision doesn't get communicated properly, then it's going to fail on the execution side. So
you nail it. I mean, like, what are the things that people see when they look at technology like Phrase or the other, like, content or like UX tools, is like, oh, you're making it easier for folks to copycat. Actually, we're not. We're making it easier for you to do whatever it is you want to do. And some folks are going to take that and think that it's the path to success is copying. But some folks are going to see the vision and say, oh, what can I do with this time? Like, can I spend 20% more time on creating like really good article, or like, maybe using turning that content into like a content upgrade or like something like that. There's always going to be people looking for the shortest path to whatever they're doing. And then there's people who are going to think like an owner and go, what can I do with this time? Like, how does this create another advantage to me? Could I like take this content and optimize it for Discover, or like, like other platforms? That's what we're trying to solve for.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I think so. Maybe the takeaway there is like, the what you get out of a tool like Phrase or any of these kind of tools is whatever your goal is going into it. And so if you go into it with the mindset that my goal is to just churn out more content, which by the way, that's not a very good strategy.
Sure. Yeah.
In most cases, right? It's
yeah.
to use that time, to use that energy to create better content or to better align your content with the search intent or like whatever it is. And I think that in itself is such a mindset shift, but like, again, search is increasingly about user experience. It's increasingly about understanding the user, their intent, their needs, and meeting them. It's not about volume of content and
so important
keywords in there and all that, right?
Yeah, like there's an arms race right now for who can do the most. But in the future, when doing these manual things actually isn't a thing anymore, the real value will be on original value that your content provides to people. It will not be, can I add 500 words on this because the first article is 5,000? Let me go make one for 6,000. The real winners in the future, and to be honest with you, probably right now, are how do I take this and then solve the person's problem better than this person did? Now, that sounds very esoteric and like in the future, but there are ways you can do that today that solve for today's problems, but also set you up well in the future. And I think like, look at HubSpot. They went from like a sales and marketing model to now like more of a product-led model. And they're building like amazing apps for like, a good example is like, if you look at email signature, their email signature generator, it's like a beautiful app that ranks #1, obviously, but like it's built to help you get that job done. If you wrote a blog post about like how to create an email signature, like that isn't solving the intent as well as they are. So that's what I mean by like thinking deeply about that time you can use and like optimizing it. You know what I mean?
100%. Yep. Yeah, I love that. I think the main takeaway for me and what I guess the lesson that I've been preaching is thinking about the user more and more and less about sort of the algorithm as we think of it or have thought about it in SEO traditionally. Because I think ultimately all of the trends and the things that are converging are around what the real human is expecting or wanting.
Yeah, I mean, like everybody thinks like whenever we say that word, like right for the writer and not for like the algorithm. Let's be clear, there are rules. Algorithms are just layers of decisions that Google has made that determine content quality. Like there's authority, there's like the depth of the content, like those are real things. But the thing on top of that separates the good from the great are those things we just talked about. Because anybody can write a long form article, but not everybody understands exactly what that person wants or like a unique way to deliver it. So if you can use tools like Phrase or others like to get rid of stuff that's bogging you down from creating that, then do it and reinvest that time into things that'll help you.
100%. Love it, man. Love it. Well, I gotta say thanks again so much for your time today, Bill. Where should people find you, check you out, learn more about you and Phrase?
Yeah. So you can go to phrase.io, Frase.io. So right up on the screen there to check out everything that we're doing. You can find me on Twitter at inboundy, INBOUNDY. And yeah, I'm talking about SEO content and talking to Tyler a lot on there. So come on over and say hello.
That's right. You'll probably get wrapped into our conversation on Twitter and yeah, that would be awesome. Well, thanks again, Bill, for joining today. And for the folks joining us, again, hit subscribe. And if you're not already a member of Top of the Funnel, please join yesoptimist.com/tofu, TOFU. It's a free Slack group, so we'll see you there. Awesome. All right, Bill, thanks again so much, and talk to you soon.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.